Right. So thank you for taking our invitation to be our interview person. So I understand that you, Dr. J, do a lot of stuff in Asia specifically about anthropology and how specifically like Mongolians and Chinese work together in a society. Can you do a little explanation on that?
I came to China in the early 80s when I was a graduate student, and I wanted to just understand how the society was put together. And I went to a province called Inner Mongolia, which was right next to the Mongolian Republic. It wasn't a separate country, it was a province, and it was supposed to be dedicated to minorities. But when I got there, I realized only 20% of the population was Mongolian, the rest were Han Chinese. And essentially, they had all moved from the interior or from to the cities to help settle the frontier. And out of that, I started trying to understand what kept Chinese society together. And I found the urban Mongols and the Han remarkably similar in outlook and values and whatnot. They shared a similar cultural ethos, though they had a different ethnic identity and a very strong one, particularly the Mongols. And in that, I looked at various elements of life. I looked at family relations, I looked at neighborhood relations, I looked at how they sorted each other's out in social standings of hierarchy. And along the way, I also looked at sexuality and sexual behavior and what was their notion of an ideal woman and an ideal man. And then I also looked at romantic love, and I wanted to see to what degree that was an important consideration.
So would you say that for the areas that you study, was romantic love really a big impact on how a person did romantic relationships, or was it more based on like their parents choosing, or like something that they could choose on their own?
China in the 1970s and 80s had moved to what I call self-arranged marriages. Now this is very interesting because we're used to arranged marriage where the parents do it. This is self-arranged in the sense the individuals will ask someone to give them an introduction. Could be a former teacher, could be a good friend. And at this time, they didn't have a dating culture, they had a courtship culture. Courtship has more formal rules, and it's not good to know that you had too many contacts. You don't have to necessarily marry the first person you're with. But let me tell you about the courtship. So you go out a courtship and you agreed to meet, and you might chat for 20, 25 minutes, kind of like speed dating. And then you might agree or disagree to meet again. If you meet again, you might chat for another 35, 40 minutes, maybe an hour. And then if you agree to meet again, you're all but engaged. Okay? Now if you don't meet again, you just don't see each other's. Okay? So you're not locked in, but there's a formal rule, everybody knows what it means. Now, to protect your reputation, what people would say is, this is not a girlfriend. No one used the word girlfriend or boyfriend in the 1980s. They would just say, this is my tongshui, this is my classmate. So you're just two classmates, okay? And you protected your identity, because what's nothing wrong with having classmates meeting and chatting. Boyfriend, girlfriend has a different meaning, right? So even if you were a boyfriend, girlfriend, you denied you were a boyfriend, girlfriend. And this was true for even people who everyone knew they were boyfriend, girlfriend, and they were all planning to get married because they've been together for 4 years. They still in public would say, she's not my boyfriend or my girlfriend, it's my classmate. So that's a courtship culture. Now in a dating culture, you can be more brazen, you can be more saying, that's my girlfriend. So you hear now the word all the time, girlfriend, boyfriend, and it doesn't mean you're going to get married, okay? And the other is, it meant that you were going to get married, and that's the difference between a dating culture and a courtship culture.
So you would say, like, then for like the Asian cultures that you've studied, the family's reputation and their image to the public was an extremely crucial part of how
It
they
wasn't the family's reputation, it was their personal reputation.
Okay.
That they didn't want to be seen as loose or a playboy. There was no double standard, because guys could get a bad reputation if they had too many encounters.
Okay.
So it wasn't like an Arabic society where you have men could play around and girls couldn't. Both were constrained.
Okay. And then, so you've read the Gary Chapman's Five Languages. How much do you think that Gary's ideas and theories apply to your studies that you've done?
If you're talking about Korea, South Korea, Japan, or China, the 70s and 80s, people just didn't talk that way. Marriages were not really organized around a love model, though some people did fall in love, but that was not the primary thing. The idea was duty. And divorce was very difficult. You wouldn't do it if you could. And I asked this one guy, he says, how do you manage? He says, we endure. And so, and that's exactly what you expect in a duty culture. You endure. And so his suggestions, however people might like them, people didn't do that. We also have a different notion of gender. Men don't talk. Men don't express their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So he's asking people to express more filling their emotions. And this went entirely away. A man should grow up and master his emotions. That doesn't mean the men did not have deep feelings. I knew several people, you could tell they really loved their wives, but they just couldn't talk. Now this changes demonstrably with the arrival of the single child generation. With that becomes the heightened sense of individuality in Chinese society. That's also true for Korean and Japanese society, in many ways more so for Japanese society. And though they're not single child in Japan or Korea, there still is a more truncated, smaller families. But there's greater emphasis on the self and self-fulfillment. That doesn't mean you don't have family obligations, but it also doesn't mean that your whole life is defined by family obligations. And in this world now, you begin to see people expressing themselves. In the 1980s, no one said the most important criteria was love to get married. Okay, women would say, I want someone with a good status, good prospects. A man would say, I want someone that's kind, good, reasonably good looking, unbearable. Okay, now there was love, but it wasn't a primary criteria. That has all shifted with the single child generation. Why you'll still feel some people will make it just on instrumental reasons. I want status, you're okay, you seem kind. It's kind of like a quick marriage type of thing. That still is a theme, maybe about 25, 30, 35%, I'm guessing here. But it's a strong current. But I don't think it's no longer the dominant current. People now expect to have good feelings, good chemistry towards one another. And the big pusher on this is women. In many ways, women cannot get enough emotional investment. So the marriage counselor is really talking to women.
Okay.
And what women want to have their husband and boyfriend say.
Okay, because men were just expected to shut up and not say anything.
Yes. Well, even American men, they might say, I love you, but they don't want to sit around talking all day about it.
Okay.
That's and men just don't talk the same way women talk. Women just talk until they die. Women enjoy talking for the sake of talking about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and guys, for whatever reason, seem not to. Doesn't mean guys don't like hearing good words and being stroked. No. Yes, they do. But however, they don't need to spend the whole day talking about it. Now that we've declared our love, let's sit around and explore it another way.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So then, would you say anything like the American globalization, would that have had any other effects on, like, say, how Asians share their romance?
The globalization is a certain style performance that you see in East Asia, such as Valentine's Day gets picked up. Now, why is Valentine's Day? Thanksgiving didn't pick up in China. No one says, let's do Thanksgiving. No one says it in Korea or Japan. But why Valentine's Day and not Thanksgiving? It's globalization, right? So you have to be careful. This is globalization. People can get ideas, but why do they reject this one and accept that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're exposed to both, but one they reject.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Chinese have a lot of family days, spring festivals. They don't need another family day for Thanksgiving. But what is Valentine's Day? It's not family day, is it?
No.
It's couple day. Okay. And who pushes for couple day? Women cannot get enough emotional investment, so they push for their man to show that you love me. Do Do you know the number one holiday that American men hate the most? Valentine's Day. Okay? And it's not that they don't love their wife. They go, oh my God, I gotta go do this. If I don't do it, she's gonna yell and cry and blah, 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 and I can't hate it.
Oh, no. Actually, I've also read in a couple other places how Asian cultures have expanded on Valentine's Day. Like the month later is White Day, and then I've heard in like Korea they do a Black Day, which is 2 months after Valentine's as well.
Yeah, they can add on to it. Women cannot get enough days to celebrate a couple. So that is that you have to keep that in mind. They're really the great pushers. And by the way, there's a really good sociologist, probably retired now, Francisca Cancian, and she wrote in the 1960s a term that I think is very apropos what's happening in East Asia. It is the feminization of love. And what she meant by that, she noticed in the 60s that American men, she's thinking of America now, but it applies to China. American men would express love through actions, which is what the marriage counselor was getting at. One of the ways you show love is through actions, giving gifts. Okay? And men would fix things, do things, but they would do it non-verbally. And Cancian noticed a shift in American culture in the 1960s, where American women now were appreciative of action, appreciative of physical gestures, but now they wanted words, because women like words. I love you, let's talk about it, I miss you, and all this other. And she called it the feminization of love. And she was critical of women, because she's saying you're not respecting, there could be a gender difference. It's not that men don't love you, they're just showing it in a male way. And women would say, yeah, that might be true, but I want words. And so what the marriage counselor, interesting enough, is coming along is catering to the continued feminization of love.
Okay.
Now, is he right? Probably so, because women really want to hear that. And would women be happier in hearing that? Probably so. I'm a very good friend. I've known for 25 years. And he's a very generous man, and he does everything through gestures. And his second wife is really angry at him because she wants words, and he simply can't express it. In fact, he even came to my hotel room, because we've known each other so long, so we're kind of good friends. It's not typical. And he's really upset because his wife was really upset, angry at him. And I asked him, do you love her? And he says, yes. And I says, can you tell her? And he just got quiet.
Oh wow! So it was a struggle for him to try to get the words out of his mouth.
Absolutely, but the feeling was there. And in fact, since I knew him and been at his house a lot, I noticed when his wife was leaving, instead of saying goodbye, miss you, right?
Mm-hmm.
He would go over and make gestures like this, but he couldn't talk.
Oh no!
Okay, but it was quite obvious he was making because she knew she was upset. He was trying to make a gallant attempt that, yes, I'm thinking of you, and she was kind of angry. Okay, on this, because she wanted the feminization of love, which was sweet words.
Okay, so women now find more significance and more heftiness, more heaviness in the words.
They enjoy the words. Unfortunately for them, East Asian men still are more closer to Sphinx.
Oh.
Silence is golden.
Oh.
Oops. Okay, that's a sidebar. Okay,
that was a big sidebar. So you were talking mostly about feminism of love, and
yeah.
So would you say that was a big cultural part of how Asians display romance nowadays compared to like 1960s, 70s?
Yeah, we shift from a duty-based to a love-based marriage on that. But I think one of the reasons in a lot of marriages you have a lot of quarreling. Mm-hmm. And it's really evoked by the woman because she's trying to get an emotional reaction back from the man. And I think in my sense of it, I didn't do it, this is not a scientific study, but my just impression with people I've known, it strikes me that Chinese, now we're talking about urbanites, and we're talking about the professional class, women evoke more arguments than American women do.
Okay.
And I think the reason is Chinese men are a bit more reluctant to talk about feelings. So isn't it interesting they can express anger easier than affection?
Isn't that always nice?
I mean, think of it. So they're evoking anger, but not because they want to see anger. They want the anger to be transformed into love. So there's a bit of a I hope you get it. As we move from a duty culture to a love culture, it's not 100%. Somewhere China is in between.
Mm-hmm.
It's not America yet, or Western Europe society at all, nor is it old traditional China. Somehow China is somewhere in between. And whether it will change all the way or stay there, we just don't know.
Okay.
But you see different strategies that women are using in order to evoke some emotion out. If your man's going to be more quiet and reserved, and you want to get some evidence of his involvement, how do you do that? And invoking arguments is one way to do it, isn't it? In many ways, it's like American high school. I mean, if you think about it, because you have nothing in common, and after you require your love after 5 weeks, all you can do is fight and then make up.
Oh, but that's usually the way that they say that relationships get stronger, is if you get through an argument.
Well, it all depends on yes. It's not argument, by the way. The research by Gutman up at University of Washington points out it's not argument that is a predictor of divorce, but how you argue.
Oh, okay.
If you argue about, like, why don't you call, that's specific to the task. Why don't you pick up stuff around the house? That's a specific task. Okay. Why don't you bathe more and brush your teeth more? That's a specific task. The index of divorce is when you attack the person's character.
Oh, okay.
You're so stupid. My mother told me I should have never married a Polak.
Oh boy.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay, and what a lot of people, and the marriages that survive, the person can get angry, but it's a specific task, and then the person addresses that task. Okay, that's okay. But when you start attacking each other's character and personality, that means you have contempt for the person, and contempt is a predictor of divorce.
Okay. So then would you say that now, for more urbanites in modern China and in Mongolia specifically, would you say that their romance is becoming more Americanized, or is it just becoming just a new form of something that only they specifically would have?
It's hard because, again, we're talking about a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And we are talking about a certain ideal. There used to be talked in American, sometimes it still is in American social class, is the John Wayne element. The rugged cowboy image, if you think, that plays out in all the little sitcoms on television and all the old channels. And the idea is the man controlled his emotions, was in charge, was dedicated, was honorable too, and respectful, but he reserved his own counsel. That still is the Chinese male model in terms of that. And so we're seeing a real interesting dichotomy where women are much more open and talkative and expressing and voicing it, while men are more reserved. Now, when I did a big survey in Shanghai of whether love was important for marriage, men and women, 95%, all said yes, they would not marry a person they didn't have love for. Okay, at least as an ideal. Goodness knows how many actually did, but I'm sitting in my college classroom, and this is what I think I would like it to be. Now, that's important because 20 years earlier, their parents' generation didn't talk that way. So love is entered in for men is very, very important. And this is very important. Love is critically important for Chinese men as it is for Chinese women. And their deep feeling is the same. But we're getting here as a cultural style of expression. Mm-hmm. Men are giving gifts, but women want love. So in many ways, if you follow Chapman's argument, Chinese women should be much more tolerant of how their man expresses love, okay, and not demand that he express it the way they do. I'm sure there are some Chinese men that can voice it, but by and large, the majority more like to do things for their woman. And it's not by accident they all picked up Valentine's Day, and Christmas is another big day. It's not a family day, it's couple day. So they picked it up, but you go out with friends. Okay, and the fact that when men are agreeing to this means they also want to celebrate the coupleness. So it'd be wrong to say, because men are reluctant to voice it, that being a couple is not important to them, because it's very important to them. And so we have here is the classic misconception that if you don't talk the way I talk, then it must not be real.
Okay, that definitely is something that is probably a struggle that will continue for a long while then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right then. I think that is all the questions that I have. Did you have any?
No.
Okay, so thank you for your time, and I'm glad.
Thank you. This was good. Thank you for the book. And in
Yes.
fact, I'm giving a talk in Inner Mongolia over the break. They invite me back to give a couple just lectures, and I decided I copied part of that. I want to give his position, which tells you something, that I'm going to give a public lecture talking about American Marriage Counselor, about the 5 languages. And I know the audience, which will all be, this will be college-educated professionals, they will listen to this because this is what they are indeed struggling. And part of it is, this is the first generation that is confronted love as an important objective and not just covert, implicit. It should be more explicit. And in doing so, they have no role models. Because if you look at your parents, their parents didn't talk, didn't express it.
So now it's become like an important part of like the American dream that needs to be there.
Chinese men and women want to have a closer marriage.
Mm-hmm.
In the 80s, people would say, same bed, different dreams.
Oh boy.
It's a popular expression, just a
Yeah.
folk expression.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets to the point. We're together, but we're just different people.
Mm-hmm.
And the single-tide generation would not say that. If they did say that, they would think, I'm in a failed marriage.
Okay.
And the reason is they have a different expectation of what marriage should be. Marriage should be more than just performing. And you see that with wanting children. Well, in the 80s, no one, even if they did want to have a child, the norm was so strong that you should. And as soon as you get married, you'd get pregnant. You didn't use any birth control, and you were pregnant within the first year, and that was just the social norm. Okay. Now, with the single-child generation, people might get married, might delay marriage into the late 20s, and they might not have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you see them really discussing, what type of quality marriage do I want? How will children do? My parents want it. But it's very interesting, even when their parents push them on this, they even say, maybe they're right, maybe I'm really old, I'll really miss it if I don't have kids. But now they're thinking of themselves. If I don't have kids, maybe I'll be lonely.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, I have to give grandparents to my kids and be filial. Filial piety now has shifted really big time to a whole sense of autonomy. And it doesn't have the normal, the traditional sense that I owe everything to my parents. In fact, it's shifted. They really think parents still owe them.
That's quite a reverse way of thinking.
Yes, it is. Very American.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And